buy or see or whatever. But you start off with these crazy ideas, and some of them work and some of them don't.
One of the things I will say that is important about the process for Shout It Out too, which is, it was very similar to The Walk, except for initially we right off the bat brought in Danny Korchmar as a producer on The Walk and said, hey, Danny, come into this process. Here's some of the early demos. Here's some of the pre-production stuff. Danny comes in, he helps us with some arrangements of songs, and then we start on the process of recording the record. Whereas with Shout It Out, some of that process starts to happen even more on the road. And then, because of our aggressive focus on the songwriting process and what it was that we were trying to achieve musically, all of a sudden the pre-production and that pre-album recording process of arranging songs and things like that starts to happen more naturally in the environment, much like this, where we're sitting there, playing the songs together, going, oh, okay, yeah, no, that feels right. Okay, we've got to finish that lyric on the second verse. And then all of a sudden what starts to happen is, although we're thinking in the back of our mind, oh, it would be really cool to find, the right producer to work with on this record, all of a sudden, all of that job ends up kind of being done for itself. And so when we start to go down the road of, oh, who should we produce this record with, all of a sudden we start looking around going, maybe this is the record that we don't need to get anybody else involved in. And so that process,
which we put our toe in on every single record.
Yeah, exactly. But you're always kind of like, oh well, it's nice to have another voice of reason.
A producer usually just plays the role of being an outside perspective, and in some cases helping you arrange stuff. And if you're maybe a young band that hasn't made records, the technical expertise to make sure to get stuff sounding right.
Or in other words, the other way to say it is, don't bore us, get to the chorus, cut the fat.
So they should fast forward for a second so we can take some questions. Zach already mentioned the idea that we recorded the record. We spent most of the time in El Paso, and then we spent another good amount of time in our own studio doing extra vocals and overdubs and things. Percussion and guitars. And
most of the lead vocals, congas, and about half the guitars were done in Oklahoma.
And so we thought we finished the record, or early on in the record, we talked about recording these horn sections, but we had decided, you know what, maybe that's overkill.
In fact, actually, there was a band that actually got a horn section who was at one of the other studios in that El Paso, and we almost brought that horn section in to record some stuff on the song "Think About Something," because that was the one that was like, oh, yeah, that really seems like that might be right, but it didn't happen.
But what happened was we went out on the road for the tour that was for Stand Up, Stand Up, we did the EP. We knew we were going to put the record out in 2010, but we had mixed the record without horns. And when we went out and played those songs and we listened to and lived with the record, and this is where the job becomes hard, to not have somebody outside that can force you to do it. You have to really be able to be self-aware enough to say, you know what, we're not finished. I don't know what that weird sound is, but it's driving me crazy. But we listened to it, we said, you know what, we've got to have horns. And not only do we do that, but we're missing something. We're missing another companion for Thinking About Something, another song like that that has a little more of a retro feel, and it feels like we're missing a ballad. And so we began to plot the next move. And we went back to our friend Jerry Hay, who is a legend. We've talked about him a lot, but he did all the arrangements for the Michael Jackson stuff, Earth, Wind and Fire, and any horns you would hear.
And he did all the stuff on Underneath.
He did, yeah, the
Louisville and Crazy Beautiful. Yeah.
So like anybody that wrote, it's like, okay, you know what that is?
Okay, that's enough.
Was that better? Was that a little easier? Okay.
Gotta be starting something was the other one.
Got to be starting something. That was the song I was singing. Okay, anyway, so we called him up and began to work on, we sent him some ideas for what arrangements they should do for the several songs. But the songs that we ended up adding, one of which had been kind of coming and almost made it early on, but there was a little idea, it wasn't finished yet, was Give a Little. Yeah. And it just was one of those songs that needed to be on the record. And it brought us all the way full circle back to how important the horn arrangement would be. And with that song, the ideas of the horns were there from the very, very beginning of the songwriting.
Yeah.
And so I think that pushed us even further. And so the other element was there were several songs that we didn't think we had the rhythm section right. You know, the bass and the drums weren't tying together.
Mostly because I was playing bass on it.
No, there was
Another case of being self-aware.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that guy sucked. I'm sorry. No,
It didn't suck, it just wasn't good enough.
it needed a little bit more booty, a little bit more.
It needed a little bit more motion,
Yeah.
amongst other things. Yeah.
So we started calling
Motion in the ocean, ladies, motion in the ocean.
Ike likes to surf. What can we say? So we started calling people to find a couple of the players that had played on early records that we talked about as being influenced by. And there's very few people that are still working, let alone living, that made records in the 60s and 70s on the R&B records we're talking about. But we ended up getting in touch with Bob Babbitt through another music director friend, and Bob was basically the only white guy in the Motown group. Like, he was the only, he's the token good fella. He's literally like this big, and he could kill you.
When he says this big, he means when he's standing up.
Yeah, I mean, he's standing up like above my head. He's huge, and he's amazing.
He says the F word a lot. But in a way that
He says it's...
friend. What word are you thinking?
Yeah. He says it kind of like Good Will Hunting, but more.
But the thing about Bob is he's an incredible player, and he's a warm-hearted, great guy, and somebody that you can just sit there and tell stories with, and he's an incredible player. And we happened to catch him just in time. He was doing recording with Phil Collins on his R&B record. He flew from like Sweden,
Switzerland. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one of the other S countries.
And we spent the last several days of recording Shout It Out with one of the people that sat and had played with Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye and all these people.
Telling us stories about the time that Stevie Wonder, at about 17 years old, decided to climb into the front seat of the car and start driving
Towards a wall.
Yeah, it was really, really, really funny. Scary.
So many. He had a lot of stories, most of which are not going to be recorded. So it was what happened on the record was that we made the hard call, like Zach was saying, and took that next step. And there was absolutely no question. The minute we had our section in the room with Jerry and with Bob doing those sessions, it was absolutely the right thing. And it reminds you that sometimes there's a place for it being really easy and for, wow, this works so well, we don't have a producer, this is really tight. But that doesn't mean you're not going to have to take a really hard examination and look at what you're doing and kind of the pain of it. But it's worth it. And the sound of the record was, the statement of the record was so much more clear with all those, those things that we geek out about but end up changing the way the record feels.
I can't even imagine the record without horns. It just doesn't work.
It'd be so much less harmony.
What's funny is he says that, but he's heard it. He's heard it without horns.
I heard it. It doesn't work.
I mean, minus Give a Little and Me, Myself, and I. I mean, the record was finished without horns.
Yeah.
But not finished.
Obviously, what happened once we finished the record was the decision to have those arrangements on it and the sound of the record inspired things that helped kind of tell the story and helped get more attention for the record, like doing the Blues Brothers inspired video and for Thinking About Something and the dancing in the street and just the whole idea and energy of the record.
And thanks to you guys, a lot of success at VH1 with the Give a Little video and also
But, I mean, the way, fast forwarding a little bit, I mean,
They laugh at just about everything. It's pretty amazing. You guys are awesome. You make us feel really funny.
I was going to try and say one more thing, but I think we should, well, we'll say one more thing. The way we feel at this record is like we would hope to be almost 20 years in. Loving what we're doing, making records we're really proud of, and thanks to you guys getting to tour over and over, travel the world, play music every night. And we're in a really exciting place for what comes next. I mean, with all the other records, we were in the going back in history, record after record. But for us, this is the last story we have to tell about a record, because what's coming next we don't know yet. But we are amazingly sort of optimistic about what comes next, because it's nice to have your 5th record be the easiest one versus the hardest. And there's way too many ideas already brewing and crazy ideas that are going around. And we look forward to having the 6th story that we can tell. We're going to let you guys